My ex-wife and ex-friend stole my $300,000 comic collection. So I made sure one of them lost everything and the other gets audited every April for the rest of her life. There are a few moments in life where you feel like someone just pressed the mute button on your entire body. For me, it was a Tuesday afternoon. I walked into my storage unit with my coffee in one hand and my phone in the other, still half listening to a podcast about estate scams, of all things. The irony wasn't lost on me later. The lights flickered on and I stopped walking. You know those movies where a guy walks into a room, drops his coffee, and everything goes slow-mo? Yeah, that. Only I didn't drop the coffee. I drank it in one long bitter gulp because I knew what I was looking at. The glass case was empty. Let me rewind. I'm Ethan, 44, former art director, divorced, childless, and yes, I have a beard. I've collected comics since I was 9. It started with a tattered copy of Amazing Fantasy number 15 that my dad bought from a flea market. It was missing the cover, but he said, "You gotta start somewhere, champ." I took that to heart. Over the years, I built a collection carefully, obsessively, sometimes stupidly. First editions, signed covers, a full run of The Sandman signed by Gaiman himself. 2 mint-condition Detective Comics number 27 replicas that were so rare they had their own insurance rider. Conservatively, $300,000. To me, priceless. After my divorce from Julia, more on her later, unfortunately, I kept the comics in a climate-controlled unit outside the city. It had a steel door, internal lock, alarm system. I visited it every other Saturday. It was my church. But that Tuesday, the church had been robbed. First, I thought, break-in. So I checked the logs. No forced entry. I checked the motion camera. Last recorded visit, 3 days ago. A tall woman in a beige trench coat. Julia, my ex-wife, using my key code. And with her, Darren, my ex-friend, former coworker, and living proof that charisma without integrity is just a scam in a sport coat. I was confused, furious, but most of all humiliated, because I knew she still had my key code and never changed it. We agreed she'd never go there. I trusted her not to. Stupid, right? But the real twist came 2 hours later when I got a letter. Yes, an actual envelope, thanking me for my incredible donation to the Hope Spring Foundation and inviting me to their annual gala as an honored benefactor. What did I donate? Oh, just my entire comic book collection. Apparently, I had generously consigned it to their charity auction. Signed the forms and everything. Except I didn't. And suddenly, all the bitter puzzle pieces clicked into place. Julia had forged my signature. Darren, the failed comic artist turned smooth-talking appraiser, had probably authenticated everything. And now, somewhere in a ballroom lit with fairy lights and fake virtue, people were bidding on my life's work, thinking I was dead or a saint. I wasn't either. I was just getting started. Ever notice how betrayal never comes from strangers? It's always someone who knew exactly where to stick the knife. I sat in my apartment that night, lights off, staring at a print of Batman. Year 1 framed above my couch. A panel where Bruce stares into the void, just before the cowl. Felt appropriate. I wasn't angry. Not yet. What I felt was something sharper. Clarity. Let's talk about Darren for a second. We met at a creative agency years ago. He was charming, good with clients, and completely full of crap. The kind of guy who could pitch a deodorant campaign as an emotional journey and somehow make the execs cry. Everyone loved him. But me, I watched him steal credit from junior designers, fudge timesheets, and smile through it all like the sun rose from his reflection. Still, I tolerated him, even shared a drink or 10. He was Julia's friend first, from her marketing days. The kind of guy who brings wine to game night and flirts with your wife just a little too comfortably. I should have known. Anyway, after I got the letter from Hope Spring, I did what any rational person would do. I drank half a bottle of Lagavulin and Googled the hell out of them. Turns out, Hope Spring wasn't some dinky little charity. They ran massive auctions every quarter, raising millions in arts-based philanthropy. Celebs, influencers, foundation board members with frozen smiles and deep pockets. It was the kind of place that used phrases like impact synergy and elevating cultural narratives. Gag me. Then I found the upcoming auction catalog, and there it was, the Legacy Collection, an unprecedented personal donation of rare comics. Each item had a photo, my photo, from my old Dropbox folder. They hadn't even bothered to rename the file names. My heart did a full dropkick into my spine when I saw the crown jewel. X-Men #1, signed by Stan Lee himself, next to a lazy caption. Verified by independent appraiser Darren Scott. Independent my ass. This wasn't just theft. It was an erasure. They were rewriting my story, recasting my passion, my sweat, my dad's memory into a feel-good bullet point on their donor report. And Julia? She wasn't just in on it. She was posing with it. There was a photo of her on the charity's Instagram holding up a slab Detective Comics number 140 like it was a damn hors d'oeuvre tray. ## grateful to give. I didn't throw anything. I didn't scream. I didn't even cry. Instead, I did what my dad taught me back when I was 9 and my bike got stolen. You don't chase the thief. You find out where he sleeps. So I started digging. Charity bylaws, auction tax records, board meeting minutes. I pulled every thread. And by the time I was done, I knew exactly how they did it, forged my release form, routed the donation through Darren's shell company, claimed a $300,000 donation on my behalf, and took a fat 12% handling fee off the top. They'd made one mistake. They left a paper trail. I wasn't going to sue. I wasn't going to beg for my comics back. I was going to set the house on fire and make Darren think he lit the match. Here's the funny thing about people like Darren. They think charm is a currency that never devalues. That if they say the right buzzwords and wear the right blazer, they'll be immune from consequences forever. And Julia? She always did love orbiting around people who glowed just a little brighter than their actual wattage. So I did what any self-respecting betrayed man with a laptop and a long memory would do. I planned. But first, I paid a visit. Not to Darren. Not yet. I wanted to look into the eyes of the person who had the decency to forge my name and then turn it into a photo op. Julia lived in a sleek new condo downtown, the kind of place with exposed brick, white quartz counters, and furniture so minimal it looked allergic to personality. I'd seen it once in a tagged photo of hers holding a mimosa with the caption, "Starting over, stronger dizzy." I buzzed her door. No answer. So I left a note in an envelope, "Just wanted to thank you personally for your generous donation on my behalf. P.S. The IRS loves charitable documentation." 3 hours later, I got a text. "Julia, what are you trying to do?" Me, "Not trying. Already started." "Julia, we can talk like adults." Me, "Adults don't forge signatures." Radio silence after that. The next day, I went to Darren's office, a co-working space that smelled like burnt coffee and desperation. His company, Axis Creative, had 1 employee, him, and 3 unpaid interns who looked like they were still waiting to get paid for lunch. He was mid-laugh when I walked in, joking with someone over speakerphone about turning nostalgia into a brand. When he saw me, the color drained from his face like a busted Etch-a-Sketch. "Ethan," he said, flashing that weak salesman grin. "Wow, hey man, long time." I didn't shake his hand. "Long enough for you to sell my property and fake my name." One of the interns raised an eyebrow. Darren chuckled nervously. "Look, man, I think there's been some kind of..." "No, there hasn't." He gestured toward the hallway. "Can we talk privately?" We stepped out and he tried to explain. Said Julia told him I wanted to be anonymous. Said the forms looked real. Said I was emotionally distant and he thought donating the collection was cathartic. The audacity was breathtaking. "You forged my name," I said. "I didn't forge anything. Julia brought the paperwork." "And you appraised them for full value, claimed a tax write-off under my name, then took a cut." He blinked. "You can't prove that." "Oh, buddy." I leaned in close. "You're right. I can't. But my friend Amy? She's a forensic accountant. She pulled the donation ledger from Hopespring. And the 1098-C tax receipt? Still addressed to me. She's very thorough." His face cracked then, just a little. Not fear, not yet. But sweat was starting to bead near his temple. "Good. Oh, and Darren?" I added, voice low. You know how you used to joke about being too small-time for the IRS to care? Hope you're still laughing when they start asking why Axis Creative lists $12,000 in consulting services from a single charity. I didn't wait for a response. I just walked out past the interns, past the startup posters, and into the sunlight. I wasn't even close to done. That was just my opening act. Because Darren hadn't just stolen my comics. He commodified them, turned 20 years of memories into content. And Julia? She thought she was safe because Darren was the one with his name on the forums. She was wrong. By the time I was done, she'd be begging to give it all back. And Darren? Darren would be lucky to work at a mall kiosk. Some men go to therapy. Some men hit the gym. I built a fake British identity and started attending charity luncheons. Healing is personal. His name was Russell Granger. Mid-60s. Widower. Retired literature professor with a passion for comics and cultural philanthropy. Hobbies included birdwatching, collecting fountain pens, and exposing grifters from the inside out. Russell was born in a dusty corner of my mind on a Thursday night after 2 cups of tea, a little too much BBC, and one incredibly well-forged letter of recommendation I wrote for myself under the name of a now retired Oxford faculty member. I set up a LinkedIn profile with the appropriate academic gravitas, commissioned a passable headshot using a face generator, and started posting about the underappreciated narrative arcs of Bronze Age Marvel. Turns out the Hope Spring Foundation loved Russell. He donated a modest but meaningful set of signed vintage Tintin lithographs to their archival department and emailed the board personally, praising their commitment to transformational storytelling through charitable enterprise. It was the verbal equivalent of a warm scone in a cashmere glove. A week later, I got invited to their donor wine mixer. That's where I met Christine Tullman, events director and unofficial gatekeeper of Hope Springs Inner Circle. She had the look of someone who's never eaten a grape without cutting it in half first. Christine took an immediate liking to Russell, and I did my best to play the part, humble, eccentric, a little hard of hearing, great excuse to avoid questions I didn't want to answer. I let it slip casually, of course, that Russell had recently sold off a large portion of his personal collection and was looking for meaningful cultural investments. Her eyes lit up like I just said matching grant. Within 2 weeks, I was volunteering as a curatorial advisor to the auction committee. By the end of the month, I had full administrative access to their cloud storage. Every donation form, every appraisal, every tax receipt. Guess whose digital fingerprints were all over my stolen comics? Darren's signature was on no less than 42 authentication records, and Julia had co-signed the intake forms using my forged name and a backdated witness statement from someone named T. Foster. I Googled the name and got one result, a guy who worked freelance security for Darren's office. Small time. Probably owed him a favor. I made a note. Meanwhile, Russell became a regular fixture at charity events. I even rented a tweed blazer from a vintage shop and wore glasses I didn't need. The accent came and went depending on who I was talking to, but mostly I kept things vague. People don't interrogate an old professor, they assume you're harmless. That's what makes them dangerous. One night, at a private preview of the next gala collection, Christine leaned in and said, "Russell, we're thrilled to have your eye on this. You're exactly the kind of steward we need." I smiled. Oh, I'm quite fond of stewardship, especially when it comes to preserving what's been mishandled. She nodded, not getting it. Darren would've. But he wasn't there. Not yet. He was busy prepping his keynote on cultural appraisal in emerging media scheduled for the next Hope Spring Gala. Front page billing. I made sure Russell Granger got a seat at that table. Front row. I didn't just want to expose Darren. I wanted to bury him, in his own words, in his own field, in front of every smug donor who ever toasted to a cause they didn't bother to understand. The trap was set. The guest list was printing. And I was already preparing Darren's eulogy. Business casual, of course. There's something deeply satisfying about watching a man reach for what he thinks is a golden rope only to realize it's a noose. By now, Russell Granger was not just a respected donor at Hope Spring, he was a valuable one. I donated exactly $2,750 worth of rare European graphic novella prints, real, of course, and all bought cheap on eBay, but they thought I was sitting on a vault of uncirculated Golden Age American comics. Which, ironically, I had been until 2 snakes decided to fence it behind my back. Enter the bait. A week before the gala, I sent an email to Darren's Axis creative address from a fresh identity, RG Curatorial Services. The body was short, professional, and laced with exactly the kind of pretentious dust Darren ate for breakfast. We represent a private collector interested in licensing a unique archive of unreleased early 1950s superhero material. Your name was recommended as someone who understands the cultural monetary balancing act of legacy curation. Interested in a chat? I didn't even need to follow up. He responded in 4 hours flat. Absolutely. Let's talk details. Of course he wanted in. Darren wasn't a collector, he was a parasite. He didn't care about the art, the stories, the legacy. He saw comics the way an opportunist sees rare wine, not to taste, but to flip. We set up a preliminary discussion over Zoom. I blurred the background, used voice modulation, and let AI transcribe my British accented pitch about undervalued archetypes in early American vigilante literature. I threw in phrases like narrative heritage valuation and symbolic asset liquidity. Darren was salivating. Then came the kicker. The collection is in legal transition. There was a dispute with a former partner who attempted to remove property without consent. We're very sensitive about appraisers with ethical track records. Darren nodded solemnly, like he wasn't the dictionary definition of red flag. I understand. We pride ourselves on discretion. Of course you do, you smug bastard. I let him believe we were preparing an exclusive pre-license agreement. I even had a friend mock up a sample contract with just enough legalese to look real. He signed the NDA before the call ended. Then I slipped in the final clause. In preparation for gala exposure, the licensee agrees to include mention of this acquisition as part of their keynote, citing partnership under provisional reference, the Granger Archive. He didn't hesitate. Anything to name-drop something that sounded rare and British. In 1 hour, Darren had unknowingly agreed to reference a fake archive created by a fake collector in a real speech on a live stream under contractual wording that could later be presented as intent to defraud if he ever claimed it was real business. Why? Because that speech was the ticking time bomb. And when it exploded, and the reporters dropped their story, everyone would be able to trace the lie back to that moment, on stage with Darren smiling into a camera, putting the final nail in his professional coffin. I didn't just want to catch him. I wanted him to confess live in HD. And the best part? The day before the gala, Julia sent me a text. Are you behind something? Darren's been paranoid lately. IRS stuff. Weird emails. He said someone's trying to ruin him. I stared at it. Then typed one word. Good. Some men rot slowly. Others light themselves on fire and call it branding. Darren chose fire. I just brought the gasoline. 3 days before the gala, I made my first anonymous drop. A carefully composed email went out to 3 people. A mid-tier pop culture journalist who ran deep dives into collectible fraud, a regional business reporter who hated nonprofits with too much overhead, and an anonymous Reddit moderator from r/comic investing who knew exactly what a Detective Comics number 140 should and shouldn't look like. Attached were digital files, appraisal receipts, donation logs, time-stamped photos, the forged signature form, and a neat little document titled, Chain of Custody, Ethan Moore Collection, Unauthorized Transfer Timeline. The Reddit mod posted within hours. The story blew up, not viral, not yet, but enough to start serious murmurs. Thread title: Did Hope Springs sell a $300,000 comic collection without owner consent? The comments ranged from, "This is fake," to, "I bet this happens all the time," to one guy who wrote, "I bought that X-Men number 1 from their auction. Now I feel sick." Then came the emails from the journalists, each one asking the same thing. Do you have proof this Ethan Moore is real? I did one better. I gave them Ethan Moore's full IRS record of the year in question, the signed complaint I'd already prepped, not filed yet, and a notarized statement confirming I had never, not once, authorized a donation to Hope Spring or consulted Darren Scott for any valuation. By the time Darren was backstage at the gala, smiling, mic'd up, and sipping cucumber water in a white blazer, the second drop had gone out. This one to the Hope Spring board. It was the same folder, but with a new file. Upcoming media leak. Immediate risk exposure. They started panicking internally, according to a friend of a friend on the planning committee. Christine Tullman allegedly walked out of the room mid-meeting, pale and tight-lipped. Meanwhile, Russell Granger was mingling in the ballroom, sipping Pinot Noir, complimenting someone's velvet blazer, and being hailed as such a sophisticated presence. And then, right before Darren went on stage, someone handed him a printed copy of the Reddit thread. You could see him pause at the edge of the curtain, blinking at it, jaw tight. He didn't back out. Of course he didn't. Guys like Darren never believe the hammer is real until it's already swinging. He walked onto the stage under a soft spotlight to polite applause, eyes flickering just slightly. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he said. "I want to speak to the role we all play in preserving the legacy of visual storytelling." I didn't hear the rest. I didn't have to. The speech was pre-approved. And in 5 minutes, right on cue, he launched into the bit about his most recent private archive partner, the Granger Collection. He even smiled as he said it. Somewhere in the crowd, a young journalist's phone buzzed. Another pulled up IRS code violations. And backstage, Christine was trying to reach the board chair who was already getting calls from a lawyer at the foundation's compliance office. It was over. He just didn't know it yet. As Darren wrapped up his speech, still proud, still posing, every reporter I tipped had already scheduled their article drop for 10 a.m. the next morning. Right as Darren was scheduled to appear on a podcast about ethics in the modern collector market, narrated by the man whose name he stole. It's a special kind of poetry when someone buries themselves and then thanks you for the shovel. The next morning, 10 a.m. sharp, the internet lit up like Times Square at midnight. The first article hit Twitter. Exposé. Hope Spring auctions $300,000 donation tied to forgery, fraud, and fake appraisals. The byline? One of the journalists I tipped. The headline photo? Darren on stage at the gala, smiling like he'd just cured cancer, not realizing the mic he was wearing was essentially recording his own confession. By noon, the story had been picked up by 2 more outlets. Reddit threads exploded. Instagram pages posted screenshots. Comic forums were ablaze with speculation, screenshots, and calls for Hope Spring to release a statement. Darren was still on his podcast taping when the producer, bless his underpaid heart, got a push notification mid-recording and paused the interview. "Hey, Darren? Have you seen this? It's about you. It's bad." They played it off for the next 30 seconds, Darren fumbling, chuckling, trying to spin it live until the host interrupted. "Wait, are you saying you didn't know the collection was donated under false pretenses?" Silence. Then, "I can't. I'm not at liberty to. This is clearly a misunderstanding, and I'm sure the paperwork." And then his own quote from the gala played back from the live stream. "This new archive we've acquired, a private collection from a collector I deeply respect, a man named Russell Granger, represents the heart of narrative truth." Oh, Darren. Sweet summer sociopath. You'd built your defense out of matchsticks, and now it was raining gasoline. Hope Spring issued a holding statement by 2 p.m. "We are aware of the allegations regarding a past donation and are investigating. We have temporarily suspended all transactions related to the Legacy Collection." Translation. We're throwing Darren under the bus so fast, his blazer won't wrinkle till Tuesday. Julia's name hadn't surfaced yet, but that was coming. I'd made sure of it. One of the documents I leaked included her co-signature on the donation release forms, timestamped a full week after I changed my address and closed our shared accounts post-divorce. No ambiguity. She'd used my name after we'd split for a 6-figure donation she had no right to make. By 4 p.m., I got the text I'd been waiting for. "Julia, Ethan, I don't know what you're doing, but this is going to ruin him." Me, good. "Julia, I thought we agreed to keep this clean." Me, you forged my name and sold my father's comics to fund your influencer rebrand. You want clean? Start by scrubbing your soul. No reply after that. Then came the best part. I got a call block number. "Mr. Moore? This is Agent Darrell with the IRS Criminal Investigations Unit. We've been referred to your case through a tip regarding charitable donation fraud connected to your name. Do you have a moment to answer a few questions?" I did. In fact, I had documents, screenshots, and a folder named Let's Get Feral ready to go. Within the hour, I had formally filed identity theft reports, submitted my tax records, and confirmed I'd never received a penny or deduction from the HopeSpring transaction. They thanked me for my cooperation and advised me not to discuss the matter publicly while the investigation was open. I hung up and smiled. Darren was toast. Julia was next. And the best part? I never raised my voice. Never sent a threat. Never even went near a courtroom. All I did was walk in the front door, sit down politely, and wait for their lies to set themselves on fire. If revenge is a dish best served cold, then this was a 12-course tasting menu in the Arctic, and I was the sommelier. I'd love to tell you Darren went quietly. That after the exposé dropped and the IRS started sniffing around his finances, he issued a formal apology, returned whatever money he could, and moved to somewhere shameful like Delaware. But Darren wasn't wired that way. For the next few days, he doubled down like a cornered raccoon in a borrowed Rolex. He posted a long-winded statement on LinkedIn full of vague denials, motivational quotes, and a truly impressive number of emojis claiming he'd been misled by sources he trusted and never knowingly engaged in unethical appraisal practices. He didn't name me or Julia, just floated in the digital ether like a sad balloon made of buzzwords. HopeSpring released a new statement the next morning. Shorter, sharper. Mr. Darren Scott is no longer affiliated with the Foundation or any of our future events. We have terminated all consulting contracts and initiated an internal audit of recent auction transactions. Translation. Darren had been incinerated and then politely airbrushed out of existence. And then I got the call. It was from Nora Levy, the journalist who'd broken the initial story. I want to meet, she said. Off the record. I think you'll want to see something. We met at a tiny cafe outside the city. She slid me a manila envelope like we were in a Cold War drama. Inside, photos, documents, screenshots, a printed transcript from an on-camera interview she'd just done with Darren. He called me in a panic, she said. Claimed he had proof he was set up. Told me he had receipts. Wanted to clear his name on the record. I raised an eyebrow. And, Nora smirked. He brought a 3-ring binder. Half the pages were blank. The other half, personal notes and contracts he'd drawn up with someone named R. Granger. I nearly choked on my coffee. He cited the fake archive? Repeatedly, she said, flipping to a transcript page. Claimed he'd been vetted by a prestigious British collector. Said he had international interest lined up. He even bragged about the Keynote partnership. Said it proved he was a leader in ethical curatorship. I stared at the page in silence. Do you know what this means? She asked. I nodded. It means I don't have to destroy him anymore. He already did it for you, she said. I looked up at her and smiled. Exactly. Darren had gone on record, on camera, doubling down on a relationship with a fictional entity, one I could now publicly deny. The interview wasn't live, but it was scheduled to air in 48 hours. I told Nora to do what she had to do. And Julia? She asked. I pulled out my phone and showed her the IRS response email. We are expanding our inquiry to include secondary parties involved in the asset transfer. The agents were already digging into Julia's forged forms and sudden post-divorce income spike. She hadn't just signed my name. She'd routed auction money into a personal LLC titled More Influence, LLC. Subtle, right? I stood to leave. You going to watch the interview when it airs? Nora asked. No, I said. I already know how it ends. She smiled, but then leaned in, more serious. You could have gone public, filed suit, dragged them both through court. Why do all this the long way? I paused. Because public revenge gives them attention. Private revenge? That gives them silence. And silence is where doubt lives forever. I left the cafe lighter than I'd felt in years. One more part remained. A final note. A reckoning. But the damage was done. And the legacy they tried to erase? It was about to live again, under my name. A month after the interview aired, the one where Darren stumbled over his own lies like a man slipping on his own ego, I received a package in the mail. No return address, just a padded envelope and a faint scent of old paper. Inside was a slabbed copy of The Sandman #1, signed by Neil Gaiman. One of mine. It came with a post-it note, scrawled in handwriting I didn't recognize. Bought this at auction. Saw the story. Wanted it to go home. I sat down on the couch and stared at it for a long time. Somehow, that single gesture hit me harder than all the chaos. It was proof, not just that people had seen the story, but that someone, somewhere, cared enough to fix it. A total stranger had sent a piece of my past back to me, no questions asked. And just like that, something unknotted in my chest. In the aftermath, things unraveled publicly, beautifully. Darren's podcast tour was canceled. Axis Creative lost its only 2 clients. The Hope Spring board issued a public apology, removed 3 members, and paused their auction program indefinitely pending an internal review. Last I heard, Darren had moved to a quiet town in Arizona, which I assume means a place where no one's heard of him and the Wi-Fi is just slow enough to feel like penance. As for Julia, the IRS audit turned up more than just forged donation forms. More Influence LLC had been used to funnel funds through 2 shell accounts, one of which was traced back to a shady influencer marketing scheme she ran while we were still married. I didn't press charges. I didn't need to. The government's doing that part for me. But the real victory? 6 months after the dust settled, I took a quiet meeting with the curator of a small but respected comic book museum just outside Portland. I told them the story, not the whole saga, just the essence. About my dad. About legacy. About what it means to lose something that mattered, and then fight like hell to reclaim it. I donated what I'd managed to recover. A few pieces were still out there, but enough had come back to tell the story properly. The exhibit is called The More Collection, Stories Worth Fighting For. It's not flashy. No neon. No Marvel vs. DC debates. Just a clean, reverent space with glass cases, soft lighting, and a plaque near the front that reads, "Dedicated to those who preserve the things that matter even when no one else believes they're worth keeping." Sometimes I sit in the back and watch people walk through it. Parents pointing out covers to their kids. Teenagers reading the panels like scripture. A guy once stood there for 20 minutes staring at X-Men #1, misty-eyed. I never introduce myself. They don't need to know it's mine. That's the best part of real legacy. It doesn't need credit. It just needs to last. So, yeah. That's the story of how my ex-wife and my ex-friend stole my life's work and tried to turn it into clout points. And how I made sure one of them got publicly dismembered by their own ego and the other now flinches every time a letter from the IRS hits the mailbox. I'm not proud of everything I did, but I sleep well. And my comics are safe. Turns out revenge doesn't rebuild what was lost, but it sure clears the ground for something better.